A black family quietly boards first class. 10 minutes later, they're kicked off the plane by an employee who didn't recognize her boss. Boarding Group 1, you may now proceed through Gate A18. The announcement echoed through Terminal D of Dallas Love Field, and with it, Julian McLean looked up from his phone, slid it into his pocket, and gave his wife a small nod. Danielle stood, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear, and gently nudged their son. "Miles, let's go, babe." At 15, Miles was already taller than his mom, with his dad's quiet demeanor and sharp eyes. He didn't say much, he rarely did in public, but he moved with the calm assurance of a kid raised to know who he was. Not cocky, just grounded. The three of them made their way to the gate, rolling 2 black carry-ons, nothing flashy, and holding their passports and boarding passes in hand. Julian, in a black zip-up jacket, sneakers, and jeans, looked more like someone heading to a tech conference than someone sitting on the board of a billion-dollar airline. Because that's exactly what he was. But today wasn't about titles or power. It was just a flight from Dallas to San Francisco for a quarterly board meeting. Routine, simple, no drama. That is, until they stepped onto the jet bridge. A woman in her late 40s stood just outside the aircraft door. Blonde hair pulled tight, navy uniform crisp, name tag shining. Her smile froze for a beat when she saw them. It was quick, almost too quick to notice, but Julian caught it. So did Danielle. "Good morning," Julian said casually, handing over the boarding passes. "Hi there," the woman replied, her tone cheerful, but with something brittle underneath. She scanned the passes. "Ah, 1A, 1B, and 1C. First class." She glanced behind them, as if expecting someone else. Then her smile returned, tighter this time. "Right this way." They entered the cabin, and it was quiet. Most of the seats were already filled with business travelers, a man in a gray suit reading the Wall Street Journal, a woman sipping black coffee while adjusting her Bluetooth headset. Not a single other black face in that cabin. Julian helped Danielle with her bag, then reached across to place Miles's carry-on in the overhead bin. He sat by the window. Danielle took the middle seat. Miles was on the aisle, earbuds already in, scrolling through downloaded shows. They weren't making noise. They weren't drawing attention. Just sitting. Still, Julian could feel it. A few sideways glances. One man's brow furrowed as he looked from Julian to Miles to Danielle. A woman 2 rows back seemed to pause before buckling her seatbelt. Julian leaned toward his wife and whispered, "Here we go." Danielle didn't look surprised. "Yeah," she murmured. "I felt it the moment we got on." A minute later, the same flight attendant reappeared. Her name tag read, K. Delaney. She walked up the aisle, stopped in front of their row, and smiled, this time with none of the earlier sweetness. "I'm sorry," she said. "Can I see your boarding passes again?" Julian looked at her, not angry, just calm. "You already scanned them?" "Yes," she replied, "but just to confirm, we've had some errors in the system today." Danielle slowly reached into her purse, pulled out the passes, and handed them over. Delaney stared at them like she was looking for something to be wrong. Julian spoke, voice still cool. "Everything all right?" Delaney hesitated, then handed the passes back. "I'll be right back." She disappeared toward the cockpit. Julian exhaled slowly. "She's fishing," Danielle nodded. "Looking for a reason." Miles took out one earbud. "Are we in trouble or something?" Julian smiled softly. "No, son. We're just not what she expected." But she wasn't done yet. Something told Julian this wasn't going to be just a quick check and go. 5 minutes passed, then 10. The plane was still parked, and the boarding door remained open. Flight attendants were busy checking overhead bins and making final preparations, but Kay Delaney had vanished toward the front of the plane and hadn't come back. Julian checked his watch. They were supposed to push back in 7 minutes. "She's stalling," Danielle whispered. Julian didn't reply. He was watching the front of the cabin. Then she returned. Delaney approached them again, this time with a slightly more rigid posture and that same stretched smile, the kind that never reached the eyes. She stopped at their row, leaned slightly over Miles, and spoke just loud enough for others nearby to hear. "I'm sorry again, but there seems to be a discrepancy with your tickets." Julian raised an eyebrow. "Discrepancy?" "Yes. We're checking to make sure these seats weren't double booked. Sometimes it happens in the system when bookings are made through third-party platforms." Danielle straightened in her seat. "We didn't use a third party. We booked directly through the airline. Oh, Delaney's eyebrows lifted, feigning surprise. Well, perhaps it's a glitch. Would you mind stepping off the aircraft for just a moment so we can sort this out at the gate? Passengers nearby had started to pay attention. The man in the gray suit lowered his newspaper. A woman 2 rows behind them whispered something to the man beside her. Julian looked directly at Delaney. Are you asking anyone else to step off the plane? Delaney hesitated. Sir, I'm just following protocol. No, you're not, Julian said calmly. If it were protocol, you would have pulled us aside privately during boarding. Not like this. Not with an audience. Delaney's jaw tensed. Sir, if you refuse to cooperate, I will have to contact the captain. Danielle leaned forward. Let's just go, Julian. He looked at her, then at Miles, who was now watching quietly. All right, Julian said. We'll step off. But let's be very clear. There is no discrepancy. We'll wait right at the gate until you figure that out. They stood, collected their bags, and walked back up the aisle. The cabin was silent, except for the low hum of whispers and shifting in seats. A few people looked embarrassed. Others looked curious. One woman avoided eye contact altogether. Julian felt the weight of every step, not because he was ashamed, but because he wasn't surprised. The 3 of them stepped off the plane and stood quietly in the jet bridge while Delaney spoke in hushed tones with the gate agent. The agent glanced nervously at Julian, then back at her screen. Julian folded his arms. Danielle kept her hand on Miles's back. Do you think she really believes we don't belong up there? Miles asked. Julian didn't answer right away. Then he said, I don't think it matters what she believes. Some people only see what they expect to see. The gate agent finally approached them, face tight. Hi, I'm just trying to sort this out. The system shows these seats are valid, but she trailed off, unsure how to continue. She what? Julian asked. She says someone else is supposed to be in 1A through 1C, but I've checked everything. Your names are on the manifest. There's no duplicate booking. Julian gave a single nod. Thank you. Would you mind calling your supervisor? The gate agent blinked. Sure. One moment. She picked up the phone and dialed. Meanwhile, Delaney hovered in the background, arms crossed, watching them like they might suddenly confess to sneaking on board. Danielle turned to her husband. This is disgusting. Julian nodded slowly. Let's wait. But what Delaney didn't know, what no one in that gate area knew, was that the call the agent had just made would change everything. The gate agent hung up the phone. Her face shifted from confusion to something closer to panic. She looked over at Delaney, then back at the family. My supervisor's on their way. They said not to let the flight depart until they arrive. Julian didn't react. He just glanced at his wife. Danielle gave a tiny, knowing smirk. She could feel it. Something was coming. Not justice, maybe not yet, but movement. Delaney stepped in. That won't be necessary. I believe it's been resolved. They can take coach for now, and we'll reimburse the fare difference. Danielle actually laughed out loud, not loudly, just that sharp, stunned chuckle that meant, "You've got to be kidding me." Julian spoke calmly. "We paid for a first class. We were assigned first class. We sat in first class. And now you want to shuffle us to the back of the plane without cause?" Delaney's expression didn't change. "It's airline policy. Sometimes passengers are reassigned for operational reasons." "Passengers," Julian said slowly, "or certain passengers." The agent looked like she wanted to disappear. The silence in the jet bridge felt like it was pressing in. Just then, a man in a gray blazer with an airline badge around his neck hurried up the corridor. He looked out of breath and nervous. "Mr. McLean?" he asked, eyes darting between Julian and the gate agent. Julian turned. "Yes." "I'm Jason. I'm the station manager here at Love Field." He lowered his voice. "I was just made aware of the situation. Can we talk for a moment?" Julian nodded, and the 2 of them stepped a few feet away. Danielle watched with her arms crossed, protective, alert. Jason looked embarrassed. "Sir, I sincerely apologize. We had no idea you were flying today. If we had, you shouldn't need to know who someone is to treat them with basic respect." Jason swallowed hard. "You're right. Absolutely. We're going to handle this. Immediately." Back at the gate, Delaney was still standing in her spot, looking annoyed now, not nervous, like she was still sure she was in the right. Jason walked back over and looked her dead in the eye. "Ms. Delaney, please step aside. You're being removed from this flight. We'll debrief after we speak with HR." She blinked. Wait, what? Why? I reviewed the seating manifest, he said. There was no double booking, no system error, and this family has flown with us dozens of times. You had no reason to question their presence in first class. None. Passengers were now peeking out from the plane. The door was still open. Curious heads turned. Delaney's mouth hung open. She looked from Jason to Julian. I was following my training. No, Julian said, finally raising his voice just a notch. You were following your assumptions. Jason turned to Julian again. Sir, will you allow us to reboard your family? Your seats are still available. Julian looked at Danielle and Miles. Danielle gave a small nod. Miles just shrugged, cool as ever. They walked back toward the plane. Same bags, same boarding passes, same seats. But this time, the energy was different. They weren't just a family walking down the aisle. They were a mirror, and everyone sitting in those rows had to look. As they returned to 1A, 1B, and 1C, a few passengers shifted in their seats. One woman gave a tight smile. Another man looked away, clearly uncomfortable. Danielle sat down and exhaled. Miles put his earbuds back in like nothing had happened. Julian didn't say a word. He just buckled his seatbelt and stared straight ahead. But this wasn't over. Not yet. The apology had been made on the ground. The lesson? That was coming at 35,000 feet. The aircraft finally began to taxi. No more delays, no more questions, no more gate drama. But the cabin felt different now. Nobody said it, but everyone was paying attention. To the quiet family in row 1, to the way Julian sat calm and unreadable, to how Danielle gently rested her hand on his arm, her eyes scanning the cabin without flinching, to how Miles, earbuds in, leaned back like nothing in the world had touched him. The man in the gray suit leaned slightly forward from 1D. Hey, he said quietly, voice low enough not to draw attention, just so you know, I saw everything. That was shameful. Julian glanced his way, gave a small nod. Thanks. Glad you're back in your seats, the man added. You handled that with class. Julian didn't respond. He didn't need to. As the plane ascended, Danielle reached into her tote and pulled out a folder. She opened it to a few sheets of paper, glanced over them, and handed one to Julian. Draft agenda, she said, for Monday's meeting. Julian skimmed it. You want to add the staffing policy update before the quarterly earnings? He asked. Figured it'd be smart, she replied, given today. Julian gave a faint, knowing smile. Yeah, let's do that. 2 rows back, a woman with a laptop slowed her typing. She was trying not to eavesdrop, but couldn't help herself. Julian returned the paper to the folder and said nothing more. Halfway through the flight, the lead flight attendant, not Delaney, who had been escorted off before departure, approached with a tray. Mr. McLean, Mrs. McLean, she said softly. Complimentary meal service, and the captain asked me to extend his personal apologies for the earlier misunderstanding. Danielle looked at her. Thank you. The attendant hesitated, then leaned in. Also, someone from corporate security might be contacting you. Julian didn't look surprised. They will, I'm sure. The attendant blinked. Right, of course. She set the tray down and walked away quickly, suddenly realizing that this wasn't just some minor embarrassment. This was big. Julian took a sip of water, then leaned over toward Miles. You good? Miles nodded, not taking his eyes off his show. Julian looked back out the window. At that same moment, in a glass-walled conference room in San Francisco, 2 executives from Stratus Air were staring at a phone screen. Did you see this? One said, spinning the screen around. Flight 22827, Dallas to SFO, passenger incident involving Julian McLean. The second exec sat up straight. Julian was on that flight? Yup. Got flagged by a flight attendant, pulled off the plane, no reason. The second man let out a breath. She had no idea, did she? Not a clue. They were silent for a moment. We need to call him. The other man nodded. Better yet, meet him. He's going to want this handled face to face. Back on the plane, the descent had begun. Julian pulled out his phone. Notifications were rolling in. Texts, emails, one from the chief legal officer, another from HR strategy, a third from someone he hadn't heard from in over a year, a senior board advisor. Danielle looked at the screen and raised an eyebrow. It's already spreading? He nodded. Yep. Word moves fast when you own 42% of the company. She smiled. Don't forget that. Julian glanced at Miles, who was now dozing with his hoodie pulled halfway over his head. Julian turned to his wife again. "I'm not even angry." "I know. I'm tired," he said. "But I'm not angry." Danielle nodded. "Let's use that." But the real power move wasn't what they'd say in meetings or emails. It was how they carried themselves, even when no one thought they were important. Especially then. The wheels touched down in San Francisco with a soft thud. Miles stirred, blinked twice, then pulled down his hoodie. "Are we here?" Julian nodded. "Just landed." The plane rolled toward the gate, and over the intercom came the familiar announcement. "Welcome to San Francisco. On behalf of Stratos Air, thank you for flying with us today." The captain's voice followed. "And a special thanks to our first-class passengers in row 1. We appreciate your patience this afternoon." There was a pause, like the pilot wanted to say more, but didn't. The plane stopped at gate 46, and the seatbelt sign went off with a ding. Passengers stood up, stretching, grabbing bags, but row 1 remained seated. Julian didn't move. Danielle didn't either. They waited. The cabin door opened. Outside on the jet bridge, 2 sharply dressed men in business attire stood waiting. Not airport staff, executives. One of them peeked inside, spotted Julian, and stepped forward. "Mr. McLean," he said gently. "Welcome back to San Francisco." Julian stood and extended his hand. "Landon, been a while." Landon James, chief of operations, smiled tightly and shook his hand. "Wish it were under better circumstances." Julian gave him a dry look. "You could say that." Danielle stood as well, looping her bag strap over her shoulder. Landon turned to her. "Mrs. McLean, I want to personally apologize. There's no excuse for what happened." Danielle's voice was low and steady. "There rarely is, but thank you." Behind them, other passengers hesitated, curious but quiet. Nobody wanted to admit they were listening, but everyone was. Julian nodded toward Miles. "This is my son, Miles." Landon crouched slightly and extended his hand. "Hey there, I'm sorry for what you had to deal with today." Miles looked him in the eye, shook his hand once, and said, "It's okay. I know who my dad is." That landed heavier than expected. Julian cracked the faintest smile. "All right, let's go." They stepped off the plane together, executives flanking them. The walk down the jet bridge was the same one they'd made hours earlier, but now everything had changed. As they walked toward the private corridor leading to the executive lounge, Landon spoke quietly. HR already pulled Delaney's records. It's not her first complaint. It won't be brushed under the rug. Julian raised an eyebrow. "It better not be. We're going to issue a public apology. I know you're not the kind of man who demands press, but the story's out now." "I'm not demanding anything," Julian said. "I'm expecting accountability." They reached the lounge. Inside, quiet and cool, a table was already set with coffee, water, and files. Julian didn't sit. He walked to the window, looked out over the tarmac. "You know what I hate most?" he said without turning around. Landon waited. "It's not the humiliation," Julian continued. "It's the assumption that someone like me, someone like us, doesn't belong. Even in a seat I paid for. Even on a plane I helped build." Landon swallowed hard. "That's not the culture we want." "It's not the culture you advertise," Julian corrected. "But let's not pretend it's not baked in." Danielle finally spoke. "We've been flying with Stratos for years. You've built a brand on progress, on being different from the others. What happened today wasn't just bad optics. It was a reminder that image and reality aren't always aligned." Landon nodded slowly. "You're both right." Julian turned from the window. "I'm not looking for an apology in the media. I want this incident to become a policy review, a mandatory training case study. I want it to mean something." "You'll have it," Landon said. Miles looked around the room. "So, y'all are like in charge of the whole airline?" Julian chuckled. "Something like that." Danielle touched her son's shoulder. "We don't flaunt it. We just show up, do the work, let the actions speak." But this story wasn't just about one flight or one family. It was about how a person's presence can challenge the assumptions people didn't know they had until it's too late to take them back. The next morning, the sun was just beginning to rise over San Francisco when a message lit up on the Stratos Air company-wide intranet. A bold headline at the top of the internal newsfeed: "Board member targeted on Flight 22827, executive response and training reform underway." Every employee, from top-tier marketing leads in Phoenix to overnight baggage handlers in Fresno, could see it. No sugarcoating, no PR gloss, just the truth. Julian McLean had been profiled and pulled from his seat, not for what he did, but for what he looked like. And the company was taking action. Inside the McLean home in Oakland, Julian was already at his desk, coffee in hand, reading through early drafts of the training overhaul proposal. Danielle was in the kitchen, slicing apples for Miles's lunch, while CNN murmured in the background. Their son sat at the counter, half watching the screen, half scrolling through Reddit. The incident had gone viral. Of course it had, but not because Julian wanted that. He had said no to interviews, no to statement videos. He didn't want to become a trending topic or a symbol. He just wanted accountability, quiet, precise, lasting. Still, the story had caught fire. Passengers had posted TikToks. One had even recorded Delaney arguing on the jet bridge. The clip was short, but damning. That flight wasn't just news. It had become a conversation starter in break rooms, barbershops, and classrooms. At 9:03 a.m., Julian's phone buzzed. Unknown caller. He let it ring once, twice, then answered. Julian McLean? The voice on the other end was soft, hesitant. Mr. McLean, this is Karen Delaney. Julian said nothing. I got your number from corporate. I know you don't owe me your time, but I wanted to say something, if that's all right. Still, silence. Delaney pressed on. I've been an attendant for 19 years, and yesterday was the first time someone ever told me to step off my own plane. I've been trying to tell myself I was just doing my job, but I know I wasn't. Julian finally spoke. Why call me now? Because it's been sitting on my chest. I keep seeing your son's face and your wife's, and I realized I assumed things I didn't even know were sitting in me. I wanted to apologize, not just because you're a board member, because I was wrong. I treated you like you didn't belong. There was a long pause. Then Julian said, what do you think happens when you treat someone without a title like that? Delaney whispered, they get hurt, and no one believes them. That's right, Julian said quietly. And that's what has to change. Delaney sniffed. I don't expect forgiveness, but I needed you to know. I see it now. Julian didn't respond with praise or comfort, just truth. Then do something with it. He hung up. Danielle stepped into the office, leaning on the doorframe. That her? Julian nodded. She apologize? She tried. Danielle walked over, kissed him on the cheek, and handed him a sticky note. What's this? He asked. Boardroom agenda. Move the DEI training update to the top. It's not optional anymore. He smiled. Good. Miles walked in, backpack slung over one shoulder. You guys gonna be famous now? Julian looked at him. Fame's loud, change is quiet. We're going with quiet. Miles nodded. I like that better anyway. Julian picked up his keys. Come on, I'll drive you to school. They stepped out the door, just a father, a mother, and a teenage boy. No cameras, no stage, no spotlight. Just a family, doing the work, showing up, teaching people, without ever raising their voices, what respect really looks like. Life won't always hand you respect, even when you've earned it. But how you respond in those moments, that's where your power lives. If you've ever been dismissed, misjudged, or made to feel like you didn't belong, just know. Your presence is already a statement. Keep showing up, keep your head high, and when the time comes to speak, let your actions say what words never could. If this story made you feel something, share it. Let someone else know they're not alone.